Today, I will be talking about God's Weaver, a poem by Parvin E'tesami, the first important 20th century woman poet of Iran. Her work has sometimes been criticized for too blindly endorsing patriarchy and for choosing the calm niche of traditional poetry rather than fishing for new ideas. Attitudes toward E'tesami cover a variety of ideas, including suspicion concerning the authorship of her poems. Her secluded personality encouraged some people to question the authorship of the poems attributed to her. In such instances, the authorship is argued to belong to someone else, always a male writer, including the poet's father. As we can see in what follows, the spider in the poem, the God's Weaver, provides a reply to such criticism. Parvin E'tesami combined the three concepts revolving around the symbol of spindle to create a spider as a woman poet, a character which celebrated women writers. E'tesami's most famous works belong to the Monash genre. In the poems belonging to this genre, she creates a debate between two emblematic entities opposed to one another in an important character trait. Jolai Khoda, God's Weaver, a poem in rhyming couplets, Masnavi, with spider as a protagonist, is one such poem. Through her creation of a spider character which possesses qualities of a woman and a poet, E'tesami formed an association between poetic creation and womanhood. God's Weaver, a debate between a spider and a lazy person, can be divided into four parts. Part 1 depicts a scene in which the lazy person looks at the hard-working spider. The lazy person's derision of the spider's activity and product forms Part 2. He acknowledges the fine intricacy of the spider's web, but derides its fragility. The lazy person goes further and gives the spider some pieces of advice. The spider's response to the lazy person's criticism forms Part 3. Part 4 is the culmination of the spider's argument in the previous part. Alternatively, it can be read as the conclusion of the debate and the moral of the story. The fact that we cannot distinguish between the two, meaning Part 4 being the culmination of a spider's argument or the conclusion of the debate, shows the extent the persona E'tesami herself, that is a secluded woman poet, identifies with the spider that is also a secluded woman poet. Spider as a weaver. As we see in this poem, throughout the whole poem, starting from the very title itself, the spider is a weaver. The title is God's Weaver. The spider is a weaver. I have many examples that shows the spider is weaving something. There are just a few examples from Part 1. دو که همت را به کار انداخته، رشته ها رشتی ز مو باریک‌تر، ریسمان میتافت از آب دهان، فکرها میپخت با نخهای خام. As you can see, spider is a weaver working with the spindle, strands, ropes, strings, all this. Now,
I'm sorry, Behnam, to interrupt you, but I think that we cannot see, because I love to see the poems that you are reading. I think that we are stuck on the very first slide. I don't know if I'm the only one.
So you
sorry
mean
to interrupt you?
You mean this slide?
We're just seeing the first slide.
Oh, I see.
I'm sorry, I
Okay.
didn't want to interrupt you at all, but just
Okay.
because you were referring to it, and so perhaps yes, thank you. I'm so
there
sorry
we go.
about that.
Does it work now? Can you see
Yeah,
the...
it does. It does. We'll let you know if it doesn't.
Okay, so now you see the slide with the spider
Yeah.
as a weaver. Okay, perfect. So these are the lines, just examples from the very first part that shows the spider is a weaver. Now, spider as a woman. A close reading of God's Weaver provides the reader with various points suggesting that the spider in this poem is a woman. She is a weaver, placed behind the door, working with the spindle, cooking and hanging drapes. The spider is described as hanging a perde, the Persian term for curtain, drape, respect, and hymen, signifying both veil and female virginity and closely, obviously, associated with femininity. Among the lazy person's criticism is کس نخواهد دیدنت در پشت در کس نخواهد خواندنت ز اهل هنر None shall see you behind this door. None shall call you any kind of artist. This line highlights the feminine aspect of the spider, a female artist who is severely restricted to the domestic sphere and not recognized as an artist by the patriarchal system. The spider is also described as having put the spindle of effort to work. The spindle is traditionally associated with women. You can find examples in classical Persian poetry where a spindle is referred to as a womanly tool, but also is used in as a derogatory term. So it is womanly and negative. But what happens in this poem is, through E'tesami's poetic techniques, which I will return to in the following parts, the feminine metaphor of spinning is elevated from the level of mere duty and drudgery to the status of an accomplishment. One can trace an association between the spider and the poetic faculty in God's weaver. Starting from the very title, the spider is called the weaver, and weaving is the metaphor that drives the whole poem. Throughout the poem, a comparison between the product of the spider and the artistic creation of the poet is suggested. In the Persian language, baftan can refer to the act of both weaving and using language skillfully. Neither this nor the image of a spider as a weaver is an innovation by E'tesami. They exist in tradition of Persian poetry. However, linking the two concepts and introducing a spider, which stands for a poet, is E'tesami's original contribution to Persian poetry. In God's Weaver, there is a series of associations between the spider's weaving and the poet's writing. The spider is described as having put the spindle of effort to work. The spindle's association with weaving brings to mind the process of writing a poem. The relationship between language and thought on the one hand and weaving and the strings on the other can be discerned in the line hooked thoughts with raw strings. Here, as you can see, this weaving is not merely physical activity, but an intellectual activity of, as you can see, writing poetry. The spider is described as making ropes from her saliva, Risman mitaft as abe dahan. The association between the spider's mouth and her product reminds the reader of the association between the poet's mouth, that is words, speech, linguistic ability, and her artistic creation, that is poetry. The point worth mentioning here is that while in English there is an association between writing and producing poetry, as you can see in the infinitive to write poetry, in Persian, the association is between speech, orality, and producing poetry, as we say in the infinitive sher goftan, to tell poetry. Again, goftan shows the connection between mouth and producing poetry. Furthermore, the term saliva is not as clearly associated with mouth in English as abe dahan is in Persian. Abe dahan is the word for saliva in the Persian poem, and the word dahan in abe dahan refers to mouth. Again, we see the relation between the spider's mouth and her web, and the poet's mouth and her poetry. The spider described as, so the spider is a poet, but not just an average poet. She's an excellent poet. The spider is described as weaving strands thinner than hair. These strands may well remind the reader of the Persian proverb, a fine points epigram or witticism finer than a strand of hair. This is a very well-known proverb or saying in Persian. You can find it in Persian poetry. I just provide you with one example from Hafiz, known as the master of Persian Ghazal, and the line reads, Hezar nokte barik tarzemu injast. Here lies thousands points thinner than a strand of hair. Here, the thin threads are compared to the fine points, the creation and appreciation of which are not attainable by everybody. Talking of a spider poet, weaving strands thinner than hair refers both to the web and fine points existing in the intricate interconnecting threads of a well-wrote poem. Present in a wide range of contexts and in both prose and poetry, Monazere turned into a vehicle to carry didactic, mostly moral messages. It can be traced back to the pre-Islamic times. However, E'tesami was responsible for reviving Monazere in 20th century Persian poetry. Monazare's exposure to the long-standing tradition of Persian literature provided the poet with predefined characteristics for their characters. E'tesami's poetic originality led her to choose novel characters whose characteristics had not been previously known in the Persian literary tradition. It is worth mentioning that even when E'tesami made use of those characters already defined in the Persian literary tradition, her poetic inventiveness frequently granted them new characteristics. The spider in God's Weaver is one such character. From among the concepts the spider used to signify in Persian literary tradition, E'tesami made extensive use of the spider's weaving, as the title God's Weaver suggests. So we have a spider whose job is weaving, and weaving refers to masterful use of language, so the spider turns into a poet. Plus, spider's job is weaving, and weaving is a womanly activity, so the spider turns to be a woman. From these two, we have the spider as a woman poet. Introducing such a unique character indicates E'tesami's outstanding achievement as an innovative poet. The spider in E'tesami's poem represents a woman poet. E'tesami associates the spider with hemmat, meaning ambition, endeavor, enterprise, a positive quality most commonly attributed to men in the male-dominated Persian literary tradition. Duke hemmat ra be kar andakte. She has put the spindle of endeavor to work. The spindle in the hands of E'tesami's spider turns into spindle of ambition. It's no longer a derogatory term, a source of embarrassment, as it historically has been used within Persian literature. She managed to appropriate the patriarchal language of Persian poetry to introduce and celebrate a new character, spider as a woman poet. E'tesami never tried to revolutionize the form of Persian poetry, as some of her contemporaries, including Nima Yushij, known as the father of modern Persian poetry, did. Nevertheless, she expanded the potentiality of poetic language in the traditional forms, as she did through creating the character of the spider protagonist in the poem God's Weaver. Persian poetry owes a new character, a spider as a woman poet, that is the result of combining the three concepts to E'tesami's poetic inventiveness. The birth of this new character in E'tesami's poem God's Weaver was the outcome of the interaction between many forces, including but not limited to Parvin's personal situation as a female poet, her poetic inventiveness, Persian poetic traditions of Monazere and mystical poetry, and the movement of Iranian society toward modernity. The spider protagonist uses its spindle to weave three concepts of weaving, womanhood, and writing poetry together. The result is an intricate fabric of concepts that A, turns spindle into a symbol of female authorship, and B, elevates spindle, which was often used to refer to women disparagingly in the Persian poetic tradition, to the status of hemmat, a positive quality almost exclusively attributed to men in the male-dominated Persian literary tradition. Spider challenges the monopoly of men over hemmat. So does she with the monopoly of men over authorship. Spider, as a woman poet, shows that authorship is not the exclusive realm of men, showing that a secluded woman, that is the spider character reminiscent of E'tesami herself, is capable of producing excellent poetry. The spider defended the authorship of E'tesami's poetry and those of other women poets. Spider not only defended women's authorship, but also celebrated women poets through elevating the spindle. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Okay.